Chapter 3 August 1951 Beijing 12th August 1951 My dearest John, how are you? I haven't received a letter from you in nearly 2 months, and I miss you terribly. Things are fine here. In my last letter, I told you I thought I'd be offered the position of Associate Professor of Physics, and that is confirmed now. Soon, I'll supervise 2 postgraduate students studying neutron absorption. I like the strong academic atmosphere at Tsinghua University. It reminds me of Berkeley, though, of course, the facilities aren't as good. The current political climate makes me uneasy. I never thought the Korean War would change the relationship between China and America so drastically. Anti-American sentiment is so loud. I'm afraid to talk about my experience in America, not to mention that my fiancé is an American. At our weekly physics department political study, I think other departments at the university hold the same kind of meeting too. I was asked to denounce the American capitalists. I was made to explain how badly I was treated in the US because I was Chinese. It was ridiculous. Even though I like America and its people, I had to exaggerate or make things up to show I had the right political attitude. When I finished, I wanted to crawl under my seat and disappear. How is life in America? Is the Korean War affecting people's thinking or way of life very much? Honestly, I really can't understand why the US government wants to get involved in another country's civil war. World War II ended just 6 years ago. Why can't we all have some peace for a change? Do you really believe the American people support their government in this war? I worry about it and US intervention. The anti-American movement is getting more and more hostile here. Hope it will ease soon. How is your research on nuclear and cell physical reaction progressing? Is your supervisor happy with your work? When will you finish your dissertation? I hope someday I can also earn a PhD, like you. Of course, that dream will have to wait until I go back to America, because over here no one has a higher qualification in my field than me. And the research facility is sadly lacking. It's been just over a year since I came home. Do you think I should go back to San Francisco, the way we planned? Or would it be better for you to come here? Darling, please advise me. I know our 2 countries have started to freeze international bank accounts and cut off communication. I hope the postal service hasn't been affected, and that this letter reaches you eventually, however long it takes. Looking forward to hearing from you soon. With love forever, Zoe. After signing the letter, she took an envelope out of the desk drawer. John's letters lined up according to date filled nearly half the space, and just a glance at them made her feel happy and hopeful. Writing to him was like therapy for her, a way to relax. But today, she didn't feel the usual warmth. Questions lingered as she wrote the familiar address on the envelope. Will he reply this time? Why hasn't he written to me in so long? Has he forgotten me? Maybe he has a new girlfriend now, or a wife. She put the letter in her bag and lay back on the bed, staring at the wall, suddenly disheartened and unsure about the future. Zuyi, Cousin Sue is here. Come out and say hello, her mother called. Zoe rolled on her side, turning her back to the door. I'm not feeling well, she said. Her mother peered around the door. Are you sick? Zoe shook her head, not opening her eyes. Her mother tiptoed into the room and put a hand on Zoe's forehead to check her temperature. Zoe pushed her hand away, annoyed. I'm fine. Then come out and see Cousin Sue. He's been called back to the army and will be leaving soon for the China-Korea border. Her mother gave her a strange look. Why? I thought he'd been discharged already. He said the war is escalating and America is going to invade China next, so he... All right. I'll be there in a minute," interrupted Zoe. More explanation, more talk of war, only made her feel worse. Cousin Sue's passionate eloquence could convince listeners that her dead cat was a live dog. He didn't even notice when Zoe finally appeared. "The US sent its 7th Fleet to the Taiwan Strait last year to keep us from seizing Taiwan. But they won't succeed this time, despite President Truman's 10 nuclear B-29s in the Pacific. Our victories since we entered the war have shown the world the power of our People's Liberation Army. That's why Chairman Mao says the American imperialists are no more than a paper tiger. Within a year or two, we'll kick the Americans out, and we'll be much safer and happier." Zoe looked at Cousin Sue, keeping her eyes blank and her thoughts focused on John to calm her agitation. The next morning when Zoe arrived, the main university entrance was already crammed with students and staff. Dozens of students carried flags and huge banners proclaiming slogans of protest. The crowd flowed like a thick red stream to form a huge pool that eventually spilled out through the gate. Zoe stood out of the way, letting the crowd pass. "Professor Meng," one of her students called, "we're going to Tiananmen Square for the Resist America and Aid Korea rally. Are you coming with us?" Zoe had joined some of the demonstrations, political studies, and assemblies at least 2 or 3 times a week. She sighed. She was falling behind in her research and teaching duties. "It's just too much," she thought. "I can't do it all." She gave the student a smile and shook her head. "Will you be back in time for my class?" she asked, remembering the student was struggling and might fail the next test. "No, I don't think so," the student said proudly, and walked away. Passing through Shichun Garden, Zoe walked into the physics building, her footsteps echoing down the deserted halls. She had planned to write an exam paper this morning, but felt too fidgety to concentrate, so headed to the laboratory instead. Maybe the physical precision required for her experiment would improve her mood. Skirting the generator that filled almost half the room, she retrieved a small brass box from the shelf and set it on the tiny table. The uranium powder was a critical component of her experiment. Holding her breath, she gently inserted the delicate gold leaf into the electroscope. This is the trickiest part. Be patient with the process. But her frustration grew with each broken and crumpled leaf until despair engulfed her. She dropped her face into her hands, sure that her work was doomed to fail and her life was slipping away uselessly. Just looking at the equipment depressed and discouraged her. The early electroscope model, so clumsy and primitive. The amplifier, invented in 1931, that couldn't measure the small particle reactions she needed. "Why am I wasting my time here?" she lamented. But she had no answer. Just a throbbing headache and an overwhelming feeling of exhaustion and regret. A stern voice interrupted her thoughts. "Comrade Meng, why did you not go to the rally?" Ma Da-goi, chief of the propaganda team, poked his head around the open door. Zoe jumped and nearly fell off her stool in fright. "Oh, I'm preparing for my class," she gestured at the table. "Chief Ma, we really have to get more modern equipment. I've spent hours trying to set up this experiment and still haven't gotten it right." He pushed the door open and strode in, looking down his nose at her. "Comrade Meng, we have more important things to think about than your experiments at the moment." "But atomic science is developing so rapidly. The success of the US nuclear bomb would not have happened without modern, sophisticated facilities. We have to catch up. The more we learn, the further we penetrate into these fields, the more complex the equipment becomes." He stared at her for several long seconds, with his brow furrowed, as if considering her argument. Then he launched into one of his standard propaganda speeches, like the political lessons he gave at the department meetings. Comrade Meng, we are in a difficult period. During the Sino-Japanese War and the Chinese Civil War, the national government had no intention of promoting scientific research, instead allocating all possible resources to the army. That's why our base is very low. Now that we're facing direct American aggression, our priority is to consolidate our socialist government and protect the new China. Imagine if the US were to take over China, if China became America's colony. Yes, I've heard all this propaganda before, Zoe thought. But science should not be bound by politics. She could not stand aside any longer. She had a strong urge to make her voice heard for once. We have entered the nuclear age, Chief Ma. With up-to-date, powerful equipment, atomic particles are perceptible and measurable, so our physicists can study them and China can compete. But we don't have any kind of reasonable equipment. I can't even do basic demonstrations for my students, much less the type of research I was doing in America, and would like to continue here. Chief Ma's eyebrows lowered ominously at Zoe's blunt words, his mouth half open. Then he snapped it shut. According to Chairman Mao, enemies were everywhere, and his military instinct now told him Comrade Meng might be hiding more serious problems behind her constant grouchiness. You mean you miss your life in America? I don't mean that, but I do miss the research I did there. Why do you want to follow the Americans? We should do our own research. Zoe shook her head, wearing a bitter smile to cover her disappointment. You're a military officer. You may know how to fight, but you have no idea what science is about. There's clearly no point arguing with you. Chief Ma masked his humiliation with an angry attack. Comrade Meng, where is your political consciousness? You are putting your personal ambition above China's national interest. You had better think about where you stand, with the Chinese communists or the American imperialists. Chief Ma left, the clomping of his army boots echoing ominously down the corridor. Once he was out of earshot, Zoe buried her head in her arms and sobbed. Zoe liked to ride her bike to work. It was quick and convenient and gave her a rare sense of freedom. The next morning, she stopped to post her latest letter to John. But the familiar mailbox had disappeared under a deluge of flags and banners that were hanging between trees and draped across every shop window. A group of propaganda troops sang and screamed communist slogans nearby. When she finally spotted the box and dropped the letter in, she felt a sense of accomplishment, as if she'd achieved an important task, and the rest of her ride seemed short. The air was sweet, with the aroma of jasmine and orchid, as she wove between flower beds and willow trees. She hummed tunelessly, a smile on her lips as she imagined John's reaction to her letter. Comrade Meng, Chief Ma's waiting for you in his office, a colleague said as soon as she walked through the door. So he could decipher nothing on his face, indicating whether the meeting would be good or bad. Puzzled, she dropped her books on her desk and went straight down the corridor. To her surprise, his office was packed with people, so full that she hesitated at the door, unsure whether to go in. Comrade Meng, sit there. Chief Ma pointed at an empty chair to his right. The crowded room fell silent as everyone turned to look at her. The air of unfriendly tension made her skin prickle. Chief Ma stood up and threw a sweeping look around the room. His shirt strained against the contours of his plump body, threatening to burst at the seams. Comrades, I would like to thank everyone for attending this emergency meeting. We have received a letter of accusation. We must treat this matter with great caution, as it may put our new socialist China in jeopardy." Irritation washed over her. Damn, not another political meeting. She hated missing any of her classes. How would she ever finish her teaching plan at this rate? She scowled, sure she'd be behind all day, until the sharp call of her name interrupted her thoughts. "Comrade Meng, during the last few months, you have not behaved like a true Chinese. You refused to join rallies to support North Korea and the campaign against America. You praise America and put down our new society. Today is your opportunity to tell us what you think and why you have been behaving in this unpatriotic way." Chief Ma stared at her, his face already condemning her as an anti-revolutionary element. Zoe sat stunned, confused, horrified, and speechless. She tightened her lips, fighting to control the tears that filled her eyes, and barely heard the rest of the criticism over the pounding in her ears. "I haven't done anything wrong. This is injustice." Finally, she managed a deep breath and said in a voice thick with emotion, "I don't understand what you mean. I support the Communist Party and the new government. That's why I came back from America." Her voice was low, but in the stillness of the room, the words seemed to shatter like crystal dropped on marble. Chief Ma's face turned red. "You came back not for the love of your motherland, but for your personal ambition. You want to turn the physics department into your own empire. You refused to join the rally 2 days ago, instead telling me how disappointed you are in China, how poor and backward it is, and how much you miss your rich and stimulating life in America. A true Chinese would never complain of having a poor motherland. Only capitalist dogs belittle our country and boast about our enemies' ambitions. China will not be subdued because of your personal ambition." "It's not personal ambition. What I said is the simple truth. Insufficient teaching and research facilities." "You're still trying to deny your loyalties, Meng Zuyi." Chief Ma called her name furiously. He picked a paper off her desk and shook it in her face. "This is a denunciation letter from a student affirming that Professor Meng Zuyi always complains about the poor facilities here and how superior American universities are. She says we all should go to America to study if we want to achieve and succeed. She has said that we should spend more time studying rather than supporting our government. Comrades." He put the letter down, looking around the room, his face solemn. After a long pause, he continued, enunciating each word deliberately. "New China is at a critical moment. Life and death. We must heighten our vigilance and not let a few bad elements corrupt our students and impede our determination to defeat American imperialism." Zoe wept silently, hands over her face and shoulders shaking. She could think of nothing, feel nothing but the ache in her heart, and was afraid she would faint. "Comrade Meng," the sharp voice cut through her despair. She wiped her nose, ashamed of the tears still streaming down her face. Chief Ma glared at her, his face cruel and hard. "Your problem is very serious. You must self-confess. Self-criticism is required to remove the American imperialism poisoning your brain. You have 3 days to write your self-criticism and hand it in. Meeting dismissed."